You are now listening to the Artsindy Crossroads show. Here, Martin Garrow, Stargate Atlantis.
Nick, and if you personally keep supporting the film like you have, then it'll all go great. So thanks again.
Gary Shaw,
voice of Optimus Prime.
Transform and roll out.
Ruth Moody, the Wailing Jenny.
You're so welcome. Take care.
Karen LeBlanc, the star of Nurse, the fighter boy.
Hi, Nick. I'm really good, and thank you for asking
People in film, theater, music, the arts.
I like your Integral style because it's casual, and it's real, it's down to earth, and it suits Hastings Street right here, right now.
A good early evening to everyone here in the Valley. You're listening to Civil Radio 101.7 FM, broadcasting to the Fraser Valley from the UFV Abbotsford campus on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stolo people.
This is right now we are on the line and have this opportunity. Very lucky to get this interview with Corey Payette, the playwright for Children of God, who is also directing this play, this production that's going all across Canada. Also wrote the music for the play. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a really big journey since we premiered the production in 2017 in Vancouver, and since then we've gone all across the country with the show, from Edmonton to Kamloops to Montreal, and then now we're playing at the York Theatre on Commercial Drive in Vancouver until March 10th as part of the Cultures season, and then we go on tour with this cast out of the 9 performers, there's 7 are Indigenous from all different nations from across Canada. And we go to Vernon and Nelson, Cranbrook, and then we have 2 nights at the Surrey Arts Centre in March 22nd and 23rd. So that's really exciting to be able to bring the show back to Vancouver and Surrey and share it with the audience here.
Children of God has been getting a lot of rave reviews from everywhere, the Montreal Gazette, the Globe and Mail, the local publications over here, Georgia Strait, the Courier.
Yeah, I think that what we know is that in every place that we do the show, it has a different impact on the audience. So the musical Children of God, it takes place in 2 time periods, 20 years apart, and looks at the intergenerational impacts of the residential school system on one family. And so we really are using music as a tool to really deepen the experience of some of these characters. Like when a character can no longer speak, they sing, and they sing in Ojibwe. They sing drumming songs that they remember, that they're sort of grasping at this memory of home and this memory of language. And so it's really the show has had a profound impact on people just in terms of personalizing that story. You know, when all these the horrors of the residential school stories started coming out after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work over the last 10 years, it really dehumanized the people. Like, they used a lot of statistics and sort of like this many people, this is what happened to this many people, and we sort of forgot or lost the fact that these were brothers and sisters. These were like aunties and uncles. These were young children who were funny and smart and had a great sense of they could have had this amazing, lives if they had been able to stay with their family and in community. And so I think that part of what's important about getting to witness this production is that it does tell that personal story of one family. And so we know that for every different person who was sent to residential school, each of those people will have a different experience of that system. And so it was really important for us to not pretend that we're going to tell this universal residential school story, but rather focus on one family, on a mother and her two children, and what that experience did to their relationships for the rest of their lives.
One of the many unique things about this production is you show different perspectives, delve later into the other side with the people actually working there. But yeah, people had very different experiences. Yeah, music and dance is very important because sometimes instead of being overwhelmed, because it's a very profound, definitely emotional impact with the audience, but if they can actually absorb it more instead of being turned away, so that the music and dances, that definitely has more of an impact, so people actually absorb the content more and maybe take a conscious effort to see what they can do about this. Issue.
Well, and I think, music is a really wonderful tool for healing. There's healing in song, there's healing in story and in dance, because in Indigenous culture, those things were stripped from us, and they were put into policy at the government level that our dances and songs were illegal. So for these young Indigenous performers who are in the cast now to be able to be singing in Ojibwe, to be able to be drumming on stage, and being able to portray these characters who are so linked to their families and histories, and it's something that is really about reclaiming our voice and reclaiming our stories, and saying that we will not let the silencing that has happened in Canada of residential school histories carry on. We need to be a part of the generation that says that if the schooling system isn't going to teach these histories in an appropriate way, then the artists will do it. We will do it through art, through storytelling, through theater, and it's been 2 years of doing this show now, and over 35,000 people have seen the production across Canada. So I like to think that those 35,000 people are now knowledge keepers. They know this now. They know this history. They have heard the songs, heard the stories, and now it's their responsibility to change and to share that story with their family and friends, so that people really understand the true history of this land.
Yeah, definitely. When this issue is covered in print, then it just kind of becomes an afterthought a few days, weeks later. But just watching the short clips of this production through the trailers on the website, it's very profound. It's not something I can forget. And these are very short clips, like 2 minutes. So
thanks so much.
If it's okay to ask, have you you've seen some of the cast members for them. You've seen seven of them are Aboriginal from different nations across the country. How has it been cathartic for some of them that you've had the time to witness? How it's changed them?
Well, I can for the cast, it's a hard show to do, understandably, right? Like, it's not something, when you're dealing with histories that you are still living in, that families are still struggling with today. It's hard. Like, there are members in our cast whose families went to residential schools, and so it's something that's not so far removed in the past. This isn't a history that's like 50 years old. This is a history where it's like the last residential school closed in 1996. So there are still people alive who went through this system, and so I think that the cast it's a hard show to do, but they're doing it in a way that they're like a family, and they stick together, and they're there for each other, and they're supportive of each other. And also something that's really important to us in our process of doing the show is that we involve elders. We involve emotional support counselors who can speak to the cast and speak to them in times of like where, emotions bubble up and things that you didn't think were bothering you are actually really, really sort of hard to go into the show every day. And so we do our best to keep them in a positive space and make sure that they know that they're being supported in doing work that is, really, really important to be telling these stories. And every single day they pour their heart and soul into these characters to be able to say to our audiences, like, this really happened. Like, these histories really happened here, and it may not be something that people are ready to face, but we have to face it, and we have to have these difficult conversations. And the best way to do that is through art and storytelling, song and dances, and that's what I think is the way forward.
Yeah, definitely, it has to really be put out there. Because, yeah, I was surprised when someone first told me that there was a residential school on the North Island in '82. It shut down,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, recently, before you told me, I found out there was actually one shut down in '96. So it's not in the recent past. So.
Mm-hmm.
So you first started writing this 7 years ago. We all know what motivated you, but what was it that actually pushed you more to take that conscious effort to really to bring this to who you need to bring this to get this story out there?
Well, I think that I recognized that part of the gap in terms of my upbringing was that this wasn't something that was taught in schools. And so that was a horrific realization, and something that really felt like we didn't understand who we really were until we knew our history. And so it began at a place of anger and frustration that history had been silenced and that history hadn't been properly told. And then over the course of the 7 years, as I had a chance to speak with survivors of residential schools and their descendants and people who were still dealing with the intergenerational impacts of the residential school system, what really stood out to me and what really changed the direction of the show was that there was a whole something that kept coming up and that was shared with me really as a gift of knowledge, is just the strength that it takes for residential school survivors to overcome this history, and of the healing journey that survivors had to go on to be able to survive what they'd gone through. And I felt like if people knew of that strength, if people knew of the type of resilience that it would take to overcome this kind of history, I thought that people would have a very different understanding of Indigenous people in this country, and that we wouldn't look at them as, the poor Indigenous people who had to go through this, but rather, like, look at what we have had to overcome. Look at what our elders and these survivors have had to endure, and so we will learn from their history, we will learn from their struggles to ensure that this kind of system will never happen again. So that's why I wrote it.
Very empowering, making people aware of this identity, that the strength of people to get through this. Also, one of the unique things about this production is you wanted to show the different perspectives, so the people who actually worked at these schools. Yeah,
so part of when I was developing the show, what would happen is I would have a reading of the production where I would share it with the audience and for feedback, and I would hear from different people in the community about the show and if it was ringing true. And then in that process of sharing the show in its early forms of development, I would often have people like teachers or people who worked in the schools as like caretakers or certain roles like that, administrators, who would come up and sort of in secret just talk to me and say, I just want you to know that I worked at a residential school, and then they told me about that at the time they were doing that this was policy. Like that's the biggest thing that I think needs to be understood about these schools is that this was a policy set in place by the government of Canada. This was about a government institutionalizing this sort of program in these children. And so the people who were working in the schools were really doing what they were taught and what they were told to do. And so then after the fact, a lot of these teachers who are now retired and have aren't obviously teaching in the schools anymore, they're facing a great deal of shame and guilt around their involvement and around what that meant to these children and their families, that they didn't fully understand or grasp what they were doing. And so I felt like it was important to also share that side of the story, to recognize that the people within it, like there is no evil in the show. It really is about recognizing that people are just people, and that people do evil things, people do horrific things, but that sometimes those things are set in place at an institutional level. And so I felt it was important to shed light on some of those experiences as well, to really have a bigger picture and a full understanding of the history.
It actually allows someone to heal quicker, because instead of just having a scapegoat saying these people are bad and just being angry, you can see why it happened. It wasn't right, but what steps do I take to move forward and heal? And for the audience too, to not have that guilt, like if they're non-Aboriginal, to see this, and when you kind of shed that black and white that people do bad things, people do end up doing bad things because of policy, that they won't be overwhelmed with the guilt if they're non-Aboriginal, but actually take steps to help people through the healing process and shed more light on what happened, and so this can happen again. So it's
yeah, that's the idea. And then also that you can't look at these, the nuns and priests and say, oh, well, they were just evil people. They were the bad ones. It's not about casting blame. It's about recognizing how, in many ways, this was a system of oppression that happened over 130 years, but that system of oppression is still carrying on to this day. It just is under a different name. There are more children, Indigenous children, in care today than at the height of the residential school system in Canada. So there are still systems in place to have the forced removal of Indigenous children from their families. At that time, they were called residential schools. Today, it's called foster care. So it's about having these audiences recognize how we are still living within these systems of oppression, and how Indigenous people are still faced with some of these histories in today, like in what's happening, in our communities today. So I think that's part of the wake-up call that it provides to audiences, is that it gives them a chance to really understand, how did we get here? How did it get to be the way that things are today? And I think that the first part of that is understanding the truth and understanding the history of what has happened, over the last 130 years of the residential school system.
Going to so many different venues, you've seen a lot of different. I guess the production varies. The technical aspect. Have there been times you've been really impressed with the different venues? Like, how much actually can it have an impact on the production? Say the lighting or the sound, the acoustics of a venue.
Yeah, the show travels with like a team of people who realize the production each time, and that's really been consistent since the beginning. So like the production that people saw 2 years ago in Vancouver is still like the production that we're touring, and what it is it's just a matter of scale, right? So like when we're performing in Vancouver, it's like this is a sort of mid-size stage, mid-size set, whereas when we went to the National Arts Center in Ottawa a couple of years ago, that was a very large, the theater was almost 1,000 seats. So it's a much larger stage, a much larger performance. And so it's really just a matter of scaling the production up and down. But like at the heart of the show, things stay consistent. So like I don't know if the audience would necessarily be able to recognize the changes in the production, just because that's part of the people's jobs who realize that that production each time is to ensure that it's consistent in every show that we do.
And you mentioned that the production is playing until March the 10th on York Theater on Commercial Drive. It's going to be at the Surrey Arts Center March 22nd and 23rd, and then touring all across Canada. And BC, it's playing Cranbrook, Nelson. It's going to Vernon. It's going everywhere. Cranbrook, Nelson, Vernon. Corey, is there a Q&A after the production, or a chance for our audience to ask some questions or mingle with?
So after every production, there's a conversation. It's a facilitated conversation about our ongoing roles in the process of reconciliation in Canada. So it's an opportunity for the audience not just to ask questions about the production, like that's really not the intent. It's really about recognizing our personal roles as part of this process today and seeing what we can do to make change in our community. I think that people have a really amazing opportunity to work in whatever way they can, you know. In different conversations, some people have said, you know, that they're going to go home and they're going to ensure that their children know this history. They're going to ensure that their schools, like that the schools where their kids go to, that they're teaching about residential schools and that they're including Indigenous culture and elders and teachers from their community in that curriculum. So I think that as much as possible, people can take away that this is about action. This is about making change and about inspiring people to really do everything they can to make waves in their community to ensure that this process of
unfolds around me, I can choose which path I take. Will it be darkness again, or a brilliant life I make? We are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are standing in the shelter of ancients. We are speaking the truth of the people. Marching to the beat of one drum, one drum. Shoulders of giants, we are standing in the shelter of ancients. We are speaking the truth of the people. We are marching to the beat of one drum, one drum. There's a time for recompense and a time to break new ground, new ground. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are standing in the shelter of ancients. We are speaking the truth, speaking the truth, speaking the truth. We are marching to the beat of one drum, one drum.
You have a soul. Put your hands together for Mr. Jason Bernstein.
I'd like to dedicate this to my parents. Love you guys.
Sounds like the room. The children's eyes all filled, red and blue. I remember the time of smelling space in the feeling of never leaving that place. When all I want is a home tonight. All I need is a place of light, a home tonight, and a home so tight. When all I want is a home tonight. It never mattered what they told me. Bittersweet witness and weighted touch. They shield my